The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. I'm Adam Frenier in for Carrie Saldo. And we'll start this week's discussion by taking a look at the Massachusetts state budget for this fiscal year, which was signed into law late last week. What might it mean for the 413? And it also includes language to look into what can be done to help homeowners who are dealing with crumbling foundations. And later, we'll take a look at new developments around the relicensing of 2 hydroelectric facilities in Franklin County. Plus, should happy hour be a thing of the present again in Massachusetts? But first, let's welcome in our panel for this week. Joining us are Larry Parnas and his four-legged companion, Charlie. Larry is the executive editor of the Republican newspaper here in Springfield. We also have freelance journalist Sarah Robertson and NEPM News executive editor and my boss, Elizabeth Roman. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hey, Adam.
We'll have their thoughts on this week's news coming up in just a moment. And if you have anything you'd like to chime in on about what we're discussing or a question for our panel, feel free to email us. That's therundown@nepm.org. All right, let's roll up our sleeves and dig into this week's topics. While many people last Friday were at cookouts, the beach, or otherwise enjoying the Independence Day holiday, Governor Maura Healey signed the $60.9 billion budget for the fiscal year that began last Tuesday. The spending plan is actually about $1 billion less than the original version the governor filed over the winter. The whole budget process took place under the clouds of uncertainty about funding from the federal government. We'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. The spending plan had a focus on transportation, education, and health care. Larry, looking at this from a Western Mass perspective, will this budget, this spending plan, be effective for our part of the state?
It's pretty much the same thing that we've had this past year, too. It's I think the right way to look at it is as the state as a whole here. If you want to be parochial about it, one of the measures that the governor's taking to be conservative about spending because of uncertainty about the state of the federal economy and everything else is that they're putting a hold on all of the earmarks. And it's $125 million worth of earmarks. One of them happens to be renovations at the Dr. Seuss childhood home. So they're going to decide in October whether that's going to go forward. But, more importantly, I think they've taken some good steps here to be flexible, to be able to respond to what does happen. Since January and the new administration, it's really just been a waiting game.
And earmarks, of course, are things that local legislators try to get into the budget for pet projects in their districts. The aforementioned uncertainty surrounding federal funding for Massachusetts clearly played a role in how the budget was crafted. As Larry mentioned, lawmakers included $800 million in undesignated funds to help fill in any gaps created by federal cuts. And the governor, at the same time, when she signed the budget, also filed different legislation calling for $100 million to be used as, quote, flexible resources to guard against an economic downturn, I should say, or cuts from Washington. The governor is also looking for authority to make unilateral cuts from the state budget for a limited amount of time. That part would require legislative approval. So, Sarah, do you think lawmakers and the governor have done enough here to guard against whatever might come from Congress or the Trump administration? Sarah, are you with us? We'll get to Sarah in just a moment, and we'll check in on that. But as we continue to look at the budget, Liz, one provision bans broker fees paid for by renters to the person assisting the landlord, which sometimes can be rather expensive. The move is made with an eye on trying to make housing more affordable in Massachusetts. This had the support of lawmakers as well as the governor. Do you think it's going to help renters who already have to pay sometimes up to 3 months of rent when you think about the first month's rent, the last month's rent, and the security deposit when they find a new place?
Yeah, I've been a longtime renter in the city, and in theory, I think it's a good idea. But the reality is, if you are a longtime renter, you know that the landlord is going to give you that cost somewhere. You're going to end up paying for it, whether it's additional maintenance fees or whether your rent goes up. So I think this is a stopgap measure to really address a much larger problem, which is the lack of housing, the lack of affordable housing in the area. I mean, I'm an older millennial, and I know that even older Gen Zers at this point are living with their parents or renting, can't afford a house. They're like saddled with, student loan debt, and they're looking for housing, and it's just not feasible with, the cost of living. So I don't know. I think it seems like a great idea. And yes, the upfront cost of having 3 months worth of rent as well as this broker's fee is a lot. So it'll make it maybe easier to get a place. But ultimately, people want, stable, affordable, long-lasting homes. And I don't know that this is going to achieve that.
Liz, I'm sure you're probably right that landlords will find some way to pass this on. But this really is kind of a pitch point in Northampton in particular. There's an outfit that is really dominant in the Northampton rental market that charges a broker fee, assigns a broker's fee as part of the initial cost of moving into an apartment, and it's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. That the local thing I'd mentioned, Adam, about this budget is they did not write in raises for the bar advocates, and these are the people who represent defendants in criminal cases who can't afford their own lawyers. It's a service that backs up the state-run lawyer provision, the Committee for Public Counsel Services. And this is having an impact already. There are local cases that are being dismissed because the defendants cannot find representation which they are entitled to under the Constitution.
Sarah, are you with us?
Yes, hello, Adam.
Hi, Sarah. Great to have you along. As we discuss the state budget for this year, Massachusetts lawmakers put in some stopgap measures to try to guard against uncertainty from federal funding cuts or the Trump administration removing funding or whatnot from Washington. $800 million in undesignated funds to help fill in the gaps. The governor's taken other measures, as we were discussing. Do you think the lawmakers and the governor did enough here to try to guard against whatever might come from Washington?
Well, I think that would require me to know what's going to come from Washington.
Fair enough.
You're not alone.
Yeah. And I don't know if anyone can answer that right now, but I think they've, at least our local legislators here in Western Mass, have done a good job thinking about what might happen and steeling themselves for that. So.
And as we continue to examine this year's Massachusetts state budget here on the Rundown, there's another provision to examine the problem of crumbling house foundations in the state. A commission's going to be established, as mentioned in the budget. It's due to release its final report next March. So here's the problem. The mineral pyrrhotite can get mixed into concrete, creating a problem that patches aren't going to fix. And Jim Kinney of the Springfield Republican did a good job reporting on this. He said it's been found in 43 communities across the state and that repairs sometimes can run into 6 figures. And Sarah, Connecticut's had a huge problem with this, and they actually created a state-run insurance program which is already paying out claims to affected homeowners. Is Massachusetts kind of behind the times here?
Probably a little bit. It's funny. My own home just had sort of a complication due to crumbling concrete in our septic system D-box. It completely disintegrated because it was also made with some of the concrete from this time when they're using pyrite. So I'd say yes, like homeowners, it's not their fault. If half the value of your home is just crumbling away beneath you, this is people's equity. It's their entire lives. I do think the state should step in.
It really is an outrageously expensive fix. It's not something that anybody can budget for. It's typically well over $100,000. Is this death by commission in terms of solving this problem? We were just talking about the uncertainty about this fiscal year state budget. When this commission comes back next March and says, we really ought to do something like Connecticut is doing, the question is going to come up, who's paying for that? Mm-hmm. And part of it would be state money. Part of it, I think, would be a surcharge on insurance policies. But the cost of not addressing this, I think, has a real social and widespread consequence, which is people walk away from houses that they can't fix like this. And this is a state with a severe housing shortage. And you don't want blighted houses. These tend to be in newer developments. You don't want sort of a pockmarked subdivision somewhere with empty houses. Now, that may be an extreme case of how it could play out, but it seems to deserve some kind of support from the public.
And you can't sell a house with a foundation that's wearing away either. Liz, sometimes these commissions, they're set up in Beacon Hill, but they don't always meet, or they run past deadlines for reports. Is this one commission that kind of needs to move with some urgency?
I don't know. I mean, I think, in reading my colleague Jim's story, I'm such a fan of Jim, by the way. My first immediate thought, my first note that I wrote down was like, this is going to take a long time. You're not even producing a report until March. And then from there, you'll have to decide what you want to do. But honestly, like the Secretary of Housing, Edward Augustus, he's been touring the state. He's really active. He cares about these issues. So I want to believe that he's going to make something happen with this. And when they have Connecticut as an example of a community that's been able to do it successfully and help homeowners, I think they've got a good start.
One of the things they have to do is figure out how many houses are affected here. That's really not known. First, it was thought that most of this mineral was coming from a Connecticut quarry, but pyrrhotite is widespread in Massachusetts too. So if concrete, fabricators were using gravel and materials from Massachusetts, it could well be a problem wider than thought.
And as we wrap up our discussion of the Massachusetts state budget, there's one thing unusual about this budget. It was on time for the first time in a decade and a half. The lawmakers got it to the governor within a day of the new fiscal year starting, and the governor signed it on the 4th of July. And it's interesting to me, at least, panel, that they actually got this done in a really tight budget year when there's been other years where this is dragged on into August.
Do you think they heard the criticism?
They may have heard the criticism, Larry, but I'm also curious, too, if they were trying to put some things in place quickly, again, because of the uncertainty in Washington.
Well, the Healy administration took pains to say, we're signing this budget on the day that President Trump was also signing a very different kind of policy measure in Washington with the mega bill, and they wanted to draw distinctions.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a sense of urgency.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if the budget remains intact and what happens. And as Sarah said, we just don't know what's going to happen from Washington. Let's take a brief time out here on the rundown, but when we return, we'll take a look at 2 hydroelectric generating stations in Franklin County being up for relicensing, and some folks not happy about that. And we'll also take a look at a possible return of happy hour. There was a hearing about that on Beacon Hill earlier this week. Back in a moment. This is the Rundown on 88.5 NEPM. Discussing this week's need-to-know news from Western Mass are Larry Parnass, Sarah Robertson, and Elizabeth Roman. Welcome back to the Rundown. I'm Adam Frenier in for Carrie Saldo. Let's continue to take a look at some of the top stories across the 413 this week. In Franklin County, 2 hydroelectric generating stations, the Northfield Mountain Pumping Station and the Turners Falls Dam, are up for relicensing. The current operator, First Light, has operated these facilities since 2018 on a temporary permit and is seeking a 50-year license renewal. That was according to the Greenfield Recorder back in January. Sarah Robertson, you've been reporting on this, and you're going to have a story coming out soon about this whole relicensing process. And I know there are some people who are not in favor of it. Where do things stand now?
Yeah, so some people might be calling this old news at this point because this process has been going on for over 13 years. So Mass DEP, the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, issued a draft water quality certificate earlier this year, which is like a really critical step in this relicensing process because it's the only way that the state can add conditions to this license. And people are really pushing to add certain conditions to the license, including higher flows downstream in the bypass region, which they call the bypass region, but it's actually just a section of the Connecticut River that doesn't get much water because all the water is diverted into the Turners Falls Canal. But right now, there are environmental groups that are appealing this license because they don't feel like it does enough. Primarily, the Connecticut River Conservancy has filed for an adjudicatory appeal to push for higher flows, more recreational access, more protections for the endangered short-nosed sturgeon. And they have filed that appeal with American Rivers, which is a nationwide nonprofit. And also the Franklin Regional Council of Governments has filed their own appeal. The Nolembika Project has filed their own appeal. And a organization called Earth Law Practice. That's an interesting one because they're arguing on behalf of the river as a person. they're arguing for the rights of nature. So this could drag out for a little bit longer.
Sarah, what have we heard from the operator First Light about all of this?
They were happy with the conditions set both by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and Mass DEP's water quality certificate. They think that the compromises are fair. They're going to have to install a barrier net to prevent fish entrapment in the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Station's intake turbine, and they will have to improve fish passage on the Turners Falls Dam. And the timelines of those are actually what certain environmental groups were trying to debate. First Light is happy that they will have, I believe it's 5 years to improve fish passage on the Turners Falls Dam. Groups like the Connecticut River Conservancy think they can make it happen much sooner.
And Sarah, one other follow-up I'd like to ask you, as far as what these stations do, is it a lot of energy that they generate? I mean, if they were not online, would it be a problem?
It's a significant amount of energy. In New England in general, hydropower is 10% of our energy mix on average. The Turners Falls Dam is not even the biggest hydropower dam in New England going through relicensing right now. There are 3 more upstream. The Moore Dam is the biggest, and then I'm not going to name them all right now, but there are 3 other hydropower dams upstream that are, some of which are bigger, also going through relicensing right now. But the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Station is actually the biggest battery that we have on the grid in New England, and that is by many orders of magnitude.
Well, Sarah, thank you for giving us the update on that. And Larry, I know you covered this. I even did too in the Berkshires with the rest of the river cleanup of the Housatonic. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a lot of advocacy, and it seems kind of familiar what we're seeing here. You know, with these 2 hydroelectric facilities, where people were in communities were very upset by it. They fought it. That one ended up going in Washington. It still isn't completely settled. So it's kind of an interesting comparison.
Yeah, you know, if you, Adam, you're sort of asking about how do citizens and stakeholders along a river, this is what joins these 2 issues, how do they mobilize and how do they draw other people into understanding these issues? I think the Connecticut River and this hydro and pump storage relicensing is a harder lift for advocacy and environmental groups because there's not toxins floating down. Mm-hmm. I mean, the consequences are environmental and habitat for the short-nosed sturgeon. I think the problem here is that, or the concern here is that it's a 50-year license. And so there's kind of one shot, even though Sarah's absolutely right that it's a very slow-moving relicensing process. Fundamentally, there's one chance to get this right. It seems like the DEP, Sarah, maybe you'd throw in on this, the DEP has incorporated concerns from these environmental groups in terms of flow and all of that. Do they just not feel that the DEP went far enough in building in their concerns?
Well, yeah, DEP certainly made some changes, like the impoundment upstream from the Turners Falls Dam is going to have to be, the minimum level is about 2 feet higher. I'm sorry, say your question again.
Oh, I was just, it's all kind of a matter of degrees in some ways. Unlike the PCB problem in the Housatonic,
the environmental groups are, there's varying degrees of what they've been asking for. The Connecticut River Conservancy wants to see more flows downstream. The Nolan Beaker Project wants to see much higher flows because they believe that native fish populations should have like the run of river that as if the dam wasn't there at all.
Yeah.
And they also want to see cultural resources better protected by having higher flows. When the river is dewatered, certain artifacts that might be important to the Abenaki or other tribes are exposed.
Yep.
And that is in that section of the Connecticut River in the Turner's Falls area is very, very important culturally, and there's a lot of deep, really, really painful history that the Nolan Meeker Project and other tribal organizations don't think has been properly honored. And that's another thing that they're pushing for.
Well, Sarah, we'll keep an eye out for your latest reporting on that, and certainly keep an eye on this very important story out of Franklin County. Let's shift gears now for a moment. On Beacon Hill this week, there was a hearing on legislation seeking to bring back happy hour to Massachusetts restaurants and bars. The state outlawed this practice way back in 1984 as a way to curb drunk driving. Julian Sear, a state senator from the Cape, testified that there's now more awareness of drunk driving and road safety, and there's also more ride shares out there than there were in 1984, and that this whole thing could be a way to drum up more business for smaller establishments. But there's some opposition, and maybe it's a little surprising where the opposition is coming from. The Massachusetts Restaurant Association says they're against it, saying owners of restaurants could be undercut by nearby bars who could offer especially cheap drinks. And the state's Package Store Association, maybe less surprisingly, is also against it, saying they don't want to see any discounts on alcohol, and they probably prefer you stop at one of their establishments and go home. But that being what it is, Liz, there is one provision in this bill that allows cities and towns to opt out of allowing happy hour. So let's say Springfield allowed it and East Long Meadow didn't, for instance. There could be a little bit of an imbalance. Should communities have a say, or should this be a blanket thing, even if it even ends up passing?
It's funny you start with me because I actually don't drink alcohol. So this issue is something I'm watching from the outside. I mean, obviously, as a person on the road, I'm concerned about people getting trashed at 6 o'clock in the evening or whatever. So, no, I think it sets a kind of a dangerous precedent, right? Because you have, like you said, you have a city like Springfield has a lot more businesses, can maybe undercut, especially the little ones can undercut the bigger businesses. And then you're having all of, traffic from East Long Meadow. If people want to get a drink at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, whatever it ends up being, and they want to get those deals, they're going to leave their town and they're going to go somewhere else to do that. They're going to generally go right to the bigger cities. So I don't know. I think if they're going to do it, then they have to make it, standard across the board.
Larry, any surprise that there's some pushback from the hospitality industry on this?
No, I think you ticked off the reasons why. The trade group doesn't want to give an advantage to restaurants or bars that maybe aren't so central to their trade organization, and liquor stores for their own reason. You got to give the senator credit for giving this a good try. He has a history in the hospitality industry. This bill is called, as they often have little sort of subtitles for these things, an act relative to conviviality and downtown revitalization. That is one of the worst arguments that you could ever come up with. They needed to heal the whole happy hour notion, because that just takes people back to the days of Mothers Against Drunk Driving and the excesses and these horrible accidents. And it's not true that now that there's more airbags and Lyft drivers, that's not going to make a meaningful difference. This has failed in the legislature before, and we can be pretty sure that this is not going to advance.
Yeah.
Sarah, what about the safety piece of all this? I mean, they did get rid of happy hour 40 plus years ago for a reason, and it doesn't seem to you like those reasons should still be quite important?
I mean, yes, it should be important, but people also have their own personal responsibility. I'm not sure how much we can legislate away stupidity.
Quite right.
The only positive side of this bill I could see is just for restaurants and bars that are trying to get people through the door that are really struggling to stay open right now, especially with inflation and just getting harder to run an establishment.
Yeah, that's kind of the downtown revitalization argument, but there's other and better ways to do that.
Well, we'll keep our eyes on it. The legislature has about another year before the session will come to an end, so we'll see what happens with happy hour, or if you're looking for a happy hour, if you have to continue to go to Connecticut, we'll see. All right, as we continue on, it's time for our predictions and scoops or praises when we ask our panel to do something that maybe is against their very nature. Spill the beans about a story they're working on, maybe grab their crystal ball, or make a prediction about the news. Liz, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now all eyes are going to be on East Hampton as Mayor Nicole LaChapelle is moving on. She's going to resign early. She has resigned early from her post as mayor of East Hampton to take on a seat in Governor Healey's cabinet. Not a surprise. They've been allies for a long time, and she's going to head up the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Exciting to have a Western Mass person in that position, but very curious to see how East Hampton's going to handle it. Their charter says the president of the council takes over, but we don't know if the president wants that job, so we'll see.
And then the city council would have to decide which one of their colleagues would take the job. And the other interesting thing in East Hampton, Liz, there's no primary election there. They use ranked choice voting, so the lead up to this is going to be much longer, going right to November. We won't really have an idea where this is all going to go in a contested race until we get there. So certainly one of the elections it's a mayoral heavy election season across Western Massachusetts this year that we'll be keeping an eye on.
Just on a budget note, somehow Mayor LaChapelle managed to work her way around the executive branch hiring freeze that's in place.
Interesting. Yeah, we didn't touch on that.
I have
today.
a quick prediction and a really quick scoop. My prediction is that when the happy hour argument goes, if it ever gets any kind of head of steam, the opponents will say something like this in their campaign: happy hour, yes, and then a lifetime of regret.
Oof.
Okay, anybody can use that. And then my scoop is that we've got a really good story that we're publishing online and in print on Sunday about the fallout from the bankruptcy of the Gardener's Supply Company, which has a outlet in Hadley, the former Hadley Garden Center run by Tom Giles. Local farms are paying a big price for this national bankruptcy because they are unsecured creditors.
Well, very good, Larry. We'll keep an eye out for that in the Republicans. Sarah, what about you? You already sort of teased something you're working on about the hydroelectric story, but any predictions or scoops for you?
Oh, well, I'm just deep in the river right now with this hydro story, and next week I will probably be at the public hearing about the draft environmental impact statement about these two hydro facilities, which is going to be at Greenfield Community College on the 16th.
Well,
I'll be covering that for the shoestring.
Thank you for including that. We'll keep an eye out as well. I guess it's my turn to make a prediction or lavish praise. I will lavish praise, and I'm going to go back to this, on the lawmakers and the governor in Massachusetts for getting the budget done on time. That's something that I've been a little critical of them about. And
a little.
They've actually got the job done under really trying times, so they deserve a pat on the back and a tip of the cap. And if you're looking for me to make a prediction, I think the Red Sox are going to win at least 2 more games over the Rays and go into the All-Star break with a flourish and hopefully make the second half of the season a lot more interesting than the first half has been to this point. So some things we'll keep an eye on, and we thank Elizabeth Roman and Larry Parnas and Sarah Robertson for joining us here today on The Rundown.
Thank you.
Thanks,
and
Adam.
remember, if you have a question about this week's news, you can email us at therundown@nepm.org. The Rundown theme is courtesy of the Love Crumbs. Our producer-director is Tony Dunn. Our board op today, Bart Rankin. And our thanks to Kara Foster and Ayu Suryawan for their production assistance as well. I'm Adam Frenier. This is The Rundown on 88.5 NEPM. Thanks for joining us.